Okay, so let's check and see if I picked up anybody here. Is Jennifer Bazan here? Izel Cabanilla? Yuan Chang, I'm sure you're here. Yeah,
I'm
there
here,
you go. I got you. Thank you. Yu Yin Gao. Yep, see her. Edza. Edza Gomez. Hugo Herrera.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good, Hugo. And finally, Issa Rodriguez.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. So I think I've got everybody who's here then. And today I want to talk about core values. And that was why I gave you the assignment. After wrestling around with the Blackboard system for about 3 or 4 hours, trying all kinds of ways to get it to accept the little quiz that I have for you, the assignment, which is just to put in 5 core values. I finally this morning got it set up so you could submit that directly. And so because I fiddled around with it that long, I gave you an extra day to get it in. And this is really a kind of a freebie for you. You'll get some points for having done it. But of more importance to me, I don't care what you put down there, but I want you to understand what you put down there. You may never have come to grips with the fact that you had core values prior to this exercise. And for most of us, we learned that from our parents or our grandparents, and may not even known that we were absorbing those core values, but we are. And they really guide our lives. So there is one other document that I put out, and I put it under the tab that says information. And I'll point to it when we get to the part of this presentation where it might be applicable. And then you can look that up on your own, but you'll know where it is. So we're going to be starting to talk about strategy in a more rigorous fashion beginning today. And this is the fundamental part of a good strategy. And so we're going to be building a pyramid of strategy. And this is what we're going to be looking at over the next couple of weeks as we really get into some of the stuff that you have been reading. So we're going to begin with core values. That's the foundation of everything. And on top of that, once we know what our core values are, we can define what our mission is. And the mission is essentially what we do, but it's what we do, what our company does, but from the perspective of our customers. How do they see what we do? And is it consistent with what we actually are trying to be doing? That'll lead us into a discussion about vision. And vision is trying to move the company in the direction that the customer wants us to take the company, so we can meet their needs in as specific a way as possible. Part of doing that is looking at the long term, and long-term goals may go out 10 years, maybe as many as 20 years. But there's something that can't be achieved right now, but a direction in which we want to go over time. And to do that, what we have to have is a series of objectives. And these are, whereas a goal is long-term, an objective, as we're going to define it, is a short-term thing that can be accomplished, say, in a year or less. And it's going to be backed up with a plan. And that takes us to the very top of the pyramid here, which is strategy. And in this sense, we mean strategy is a written plan, because your objectives, you want to make sure, are backed up with a written plan telling they should be time binding, quantifiable, and have a person in charge. So let's begin the process tonight by just looking at the first of those, which is core values. And these are the things that we believe that are part of our internal um, consciousness, I guess would be the word to use with it. It's something that is very deep within us as to what our core, how we conduct ourselves. So, in respect to a business situation, what are the core values? These are the bedrock basic beliefs that define the company. And sometime back, I told you there were several words that we would be using, and some people treat them differently. Uh, uh, and one of those sets of words is basic beliefs or core values. We're going to treat those as interchangeable. And as you're beginning to think about going out and looking for a job when you finish school here, one of the things that you need to be thinking about. Now, I guess I shouldn't say when you go out looking for a job, when you get ready to go out and take the next step in your career path, which is different than from just finding a job. A job is pretty much a place where you put food on the table, whereas that career is something where you're going to be investing yourself for the long term. But as you begin to look at making that next career step, what you want to make sure is that the company that you're looking at has the same kind of values that you do. And this is what you expect the company to look like when you get to work there. And you should be, as part of the interview process, should be looking for the cues that the interviewer gives you where he or she will be explaining to you what their company's all about. And what you want to be looking for is to see, is there any correspondence between what the company says are their values and how they're lived out. Now, there's another word we use with this, and that is culture. And I don't, I've read a lot about culture and about core values or basic beliefs, and I've never really seen a good document that puts those two ideas together, culture and core values. And yet they're part and parcel of one another. So I'm going to perhaps be wrong, but I'm going to define this as culture is what you see that allows you to define by examination, by observation, what the company's core values are. We would expect where people are articulating or are telling you what their core values are. You don't want to see what they tell you. You want to see what they do. And is there a match between the word and the deed? And this is not only telling the you as a potential employee, and as employees do with one another within a company, but also it talks to the community because the core values tell the community how you do business. And I am a book aficionado, so I deal with a lot of different book dealers, and they rat on one another. And there are people that have presumably very good core values, but they don't act them out in the marketplace. And those are the people you want to stay away from. And you could pick any calling whatsoever, and you'll find that there's a difference between companies that live up to their core values and those that don't. And the community knows, and that impacts their ability to sell goods and make a profit. So the core values also give a guide to the employee as how to act and how the organization should act. Well, we all have core values. Where do you think they come from? Because they're there within you and always have been since you were a child. But you may not have really come to grips with that previously. But these are your non-negotiable beliefs. They're the things that are so strong that you'll go to the mat uh, to not violate those. And you're going to find that in business that the mission, the vision, and the strategy may change, but they're all subordinate to the core values. So as the mission and visions change, the core values remain the anchor. Now, the year 2020 was a very difficult year, as I'm sure you're well aware. And people had to change their strategy. You couldn't do the same strategy in April that you'd done in February of that last year. And so businesses, particularly small businesses who were hurt the most with the COVID shutdowns, the companies that were hurt the most, the small businesses, became extremely agile and came up with a variety of really creative things that are going to offer real opportunities for those companies as we come out of our quarantine shelters. So they had to change their mission and they had to change their vision. But I hope, and what we would desire to see them do is to keep the same core values that they have, how they intend to live their life and how they intend to service their customers. Well, I have always had core values in every company that I've been associated with. And I've probably started about 10 companies in my career, in addition to the places where I worked for somebody else. And for all those companies that I started up, I always established core values right from the onset. But I gave them lip service. It was an exercise. It's part of like writing up a business plan that everybody does and nobody uses. But I actually did use my core values. I applied them to my personal behavior. But because I didn't make them important in the eyes of the other people that work with me, because I didn't communicate them, they really had no effect on company performance. And most of these ended up as being flops, but every now and again you get lucky and get one that works the right way. And what I would say was a key part of the success that we had in the ones that were really good was that we did use the core values we'd established. So what I did, though, particularly in my early years, certainly in the last, say 15, 20 years, I've gotten much more disciplined about this and have a much better understanding and have raised the value in my eyes of what core values are all about. What I did was just adopted the values of the company that I knew, and that was IBM. And when I went to work at IBM, when I walked through the door the first day, they gave me a business card, and it had on the back of the card, it had the company's, what they called their basic beliefs. And I think they took a branding iron and branded them to my forehead because I can remember them. That was 55 years ago. And they are respect for the individual, approach every problem as though it can be solved in a superior manner, and give the best customer service in the world. Right there. You can check me out. Now, for my life at IBM, that was how we acted continually. But in my other life, when I left that company, all I did was copy and paste these values and really didn't give them much penetrating thought as to what they might mean for the operations of the company. And the funny thing is that if there's any word that applies to IBM, it's think. And I showed you earlier a little plaque that all managers had on their desk that reminded people to think critically about the tasks that they had. Well, understand that the company IBM's core values were not that company's values, but they reflected the values of the people who made up the company. And so now I want to ask you, which I did, and ask you for this assignment, which you now have an extra day to complete if you didn't do it. How do you want to be known? This is where do we get our core values? How do you want to be known? What values do you think are important in conducting your life? How do you want others to see you? And what do you want to see on your epitaph? So I'm going to stop now and allow you to take charge of part of this and tell me what you believe are your core values.
Professor,
Yes.
I can participate in this one if you want. You let me.
I'm sorry.
I can participate in this one. I'll be happy to participate in this one.
Okay, good.
Some of my core values since I graduated high school and I started working was treat the individuals that I work with respect, because some of the companies I used to work for didn't have that core value. So I learned on my own to be good to other people so they can make your day at work.
Yeah, and that's going to carry you through a good life too, irrespective of whether you're even working. But if you treat people right, you can have a tremendous impact on their life. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Professor.
Guess I'll add on that because the one I have is pretty similar to his. So mine, one of my big ones is definitely love and respect the opposing fan, regardless of how bad they're heckling you. And there's a lot in that. It's not just those fans in front of you that are of an opposing team or wearing a different color. We're at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we're there to have a good time, but there's a point where things can get a little crazy. And I have seen them many times going to multitudes of sporting events. And just the importance of, that's wonderful to have a little bit of elbow rubbing. Sure, that's fine, but know where to draw the line, and remember that, hey, these are people too. They're just as human as you are. Deep down inside, where we all have the same or very similar struggles. So you don't know where they're coming from. Respect them, and that then goes from not just a rivalry, from just a sports rivalry, but can be added to multitudes of other things as well.
Yeah, that's how we are supposed to be living our life. And what we're seeing today, when you look at Washington, D.C., is everyone is very serious that they are developing real long-term hates. Whereas, hey, we should be able to have our discussion during the course of the day and then go out and have dinner together and be just as cordial as if there was nothing there to separate us.
Yeah.
I've got a great little film clip, but I'm not bold enough to try and pull it up and show it to you. But and that's because this thing is so fragile as I try and use it. But I'll make a note of that to have it on next time.
Yep.
About a 30-second clip. Who else has core values in this room?
I can make a core value that I have. One of them is consistency for me. I work in sales, so consistency is one of the most important factor in sales. So ever since I was younger too, it's like I have to be consistent, but like for everything, like how I act, how much I work throughout my day. So with sales specifically, you have numbers to meet every month. So for me, if I'm not consistent, then I'm not doing my job properly. So that's probably one of my main core value is right now. And even between like sales and not sales, I'm a pretty competitive person. So being consistent and competitive is a very important factor. They kind of coincide together. So
It's two separate values, though, nonetheless.
they're two separate values, but they meet together.
They sure do. And that's if you're going to get promotions in your work, the employer is going to be looking for that consistency of performance. You can't have bad hair days.
Yep. You have to show that you're there every single month. So
Yeah, you get to keep your job 1 month at a time.
it's a horrible thing to think about, but yeah, it's true.
And people often ask me, how long do I have? If I'm going to leave the company, how long in advance do I tell the employer that I'm planning to go someplace else? And my answer is, how long is that pay period? Because essentially most of us are just on a renewable 2-week contract. That every 2 weeks, if there's still a time card out there for you to fill out, you're good for another 2 weeks. But that's what you owe the company, is 2 weeks and 2 weeks only. If they want to tie you up like you're going to try and tie up your sports celebrities for the game, you can pledge it for a year or 2 or 3 years, but you're going to pay that for that whole time. So who else has some ideas?
I have some, Professor. For me,
Okay.
it would
so that-
probably be honesty and integrity.
uh,
I had a teacher that really drilled that into our mind when it came to doing our homework. He basically made us said if you're doing this work and you're not cheating, or you're doing the work you're supposed to be doing, then sign the paper and write integrity. And that just always stuck with me. So I feel like with whatever work you do, whether it's with some big company or everyday life, you should always have the integrity and honesty of what you're doing.
There was that one slide I showed in the thing where we talked about your balancing your work life and your home life. What Alan Simpson said, if you've got integrity, nothing else matters. And if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. That really becomes a dividing line between people of value and people whom you can't trust, or with whom you don't really want to do business. And I'm talking about all kinds of business, not commercial transactions, but also in your friendships and your social life as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Vanessa. Anyone else?
I have one.
Okay.
Treat people the way you want to be treated.
The golden rule.
Yeah. Because one day you never know, you may need help, and those people might help you out one day.
Yeah, that's right. And there's some very interesting YouTubes out there that show someone being ill-treated, whose life changed, and now the same circumstance came around with the person, rather being on the bottom, they're now on the top, and how are they going to treat the person who treated them badly? But let's see. I don't think I've got it on my desk, but in that little book that I took 2 quotes from, that I put in when I ask you for your life story. One of the other little quotes out of that book is, there is lots of hate in this world, but there is far more love than anyone even knows. And that really is the elixir that we need to make our lives worthwhile, is to be loving toward one another in all respects. Anyone else want to make a contribution here? Thanks, Mario. All right, well, then I'm going to go back to the slides, and we'll proceed on. That last question right here is a big one for you. What do you want to be? What do you want to be on your epitaph? The real source of the core values of a company all relate to the core values of the individual. And what happens is as you impute your personal values to the company, they become the source of the company's value and culture, and they'll endure long after you've left the company. These are things where you do the setup right, and it'll endure as long as the company exists. Now, just before class this morning, I went out and checked because this is a book that was written by Thomas Watson Jr. It was a book that they gave to us at IBM, and we had to sign a card or a statement each year that we had reread this book. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of it. Thomas Watson Sr. was a sales manager for, or sales VP for a company called NCR, National Cash Register. And he was hired away from that, actually was not hired away, he got fired. And how he knew he got fired is he came back from traveling one day, and on the front lawn of the company headquarters, all his furniture was out on the grass. And so he was a good sport about it. He set up a tent and worked for about a week in that tent in the front yard of the company before he finally caved in and said it's time to go on someplace else. Well, he was hired in by a group of people up in New York to run 3 companies that were put together: the computing, tabulating, and recording company, Simplex Time Clocks, and Hobart Meat Scales. And in putting those together, Thomas Watson changed the name to International Business Machines, or IBM. And one of the first things that he did was to put together the basic beliefs that I've quoted to you earlier in the lecture. And he served as president of the company for about 20 years, and then was succeeded by his son, Thomas Watson Jr. And as great an executive as Thomas Watson was, his son was even greater. And one of the things that he did was to write this book, A Business and Its Beliefs. And this particular copy is for sale online for about $15. And what he did was to take the 3 ideas about respect, about doing things right, and about customer service, and build a chapter around each of them so you could understand not just the phrases, but the actual reason for having those phrases. So if somebody wants to grab that book, you can probably still do it today. I kept my copy after I left the company, and I think it's one of the most inspiring books that I have read for management. Very short, pithy ideas. So you use these as you build your company. And what you do if you are in charge of hiring for your company, whether you're a manager that has hiring responsibility or opportunity, or whether you're the CEO, what you're going to do is look for people that share your values. So when you hire them in, you want to make sure that they are going to be complementary to what you set up as your basic values for the company. So let's go back to IBM again, and this is their core values: the respect, the superior approach to problems, and giving the best customer service in the world. And this was, for me, a fixed point in my business universe. It was the first job I had. That's a real job, first career move in my head that I had, and I really bought into these basic beliefs. And so I knew that as I went through the rest of my career, that was one thing I could look back on and know it would always be the same. And then I had my world shattered because in the year 2000, I think it was in 2003, after nearly 100 years, IBM rewrote its basic beliefs. And I don't know today, as I reflect back on it, if I had been in that position, I don't know that I would have done this. But the president at that time was a man named Sam Palisano. And what he wanted to do was he said, he felt that the company was losing its mojo. And so what he wanted to do was to go back and see if he could re-energize everyone. And the way he did this was with what they called a 72-hour values jam. And they put it on their intranet, their internal email system, and allowed every one of their 270,000 employees to contribute anything that they thought would be the appropriate new core values for the company. And there was no limits put on what you could put down there, which you might say, well, man, that's really dicey, because you never can tell what they're going to come up with, and you've got a reputation that you've got to maintain. But that was what they did. And they came up with a new set of values, and these are those values: dedication to every client's success, innovation that matters for our company and for the world, and trust and personal responsibility in all relationships. Now, if you look at it, dedication to every customer's success sounds a lot like give the best customer service in the world. Innovation that matters for our company and for the world sounds a lot like approach every problem as though it can be solved in a superior manner. And trust and responsibility in all relationships sure sounds a lot like respect for the individual. And if you accept what I have just told you, you would see that all they've done is to turn the list upside down. Number one is now number three is now number one, and number two remained the same in terms of its position on the business card they handed out. But essentially, it was just a restatement of what they had set up as their basic beliefs 100 years before. Now, I said, I don't know whether I don't think I would have done this if I were in Sam Palisano's position. But I do know that he was not really taking much of a risk in doing this. He was going to try and energize everyone's enthusiasm. But he knew, because they had they had 250,000 people on the payroll, and they represented probably another 250,000 people who'd been hired over the years, all of whom came in on the basis that they understood and accepted the core values or basic beliefs of the company at the time they hired on. So, it was pretty much a guarantee that they were going to get the same answers from dedicated people as they had started with, because that's how they were hired and how they lived their life at the company. Now, this is not regimenting people so that they don't have any freedom to do what they want to do. In fact, there is a chapter in that book. It's called Wild Ducks. What do you do when you got a wild duck in the organization? And Thomas Watson Jr. addressed that and said, we make room for wild ducks. That it goes back and turn to a story by Soren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher. And I'm not going to drag out that whole story, but he did allow that they would permit mavericks to be in the company. Well, this IBM is probably the greatest IT company in the history of the world. It's not as its lead is not as great as it once was. They have run into troubles through the years, but they're returning back to their roots. Another company, probably the other company that is most respected, but it's a company also that's been going through some hard times in recent years, is HP, Hewlett Packard. And these are their core values: trust and respect for individuals, achievement and contribution, results through teamwork, meaningful innovation, and uncompromising integrity. And again, if you wanted to research that a little bit more, incidentally, I said I would tell you when I got to the point where the sheet of paper on the information tab is the outcome of the values jam for IBM, along with the description of what each of those core values that they've agreed to as for their second century, what they mean, how they would be implemented in the company. Excuse me. In the same way, if you go out and look up Hewlett Packard on HP Way on the internet, then just go out and find that, you would find out the history and importance of the what they called shared values at Hewlett Packard. Now that's Bill Hewlett and David Packard. David's the tall one, standing in front of a garage, and the garage with the doors open is the same garage that it's in Palo Alto, and that is ground zero for Silicon Valley. This is a shrine today, but that's where they began, Hewlett Packard, and that led to all of the other tech companies up there in the Bay Area. And the interesting thing is that when Hewlett and Packard started their company, they didn't know what kind of product they were going to produce, but they put together their basic beliefs, their shared values, before they even made their first product. And they have become bone deep inside that organization. So this is important stuff. Well, what do you do if you have an existing company that you want to create core values for when there's no written core values at this time? Now understand that all companies will have core values. You have got core values for your own life, even if you've never articulated them, even if you've never written them down. But this is true in companies too, that even if there's no written document with them on there, the core values exist. Well, I spent some time working with a company that the president of the company had inherited from his parents. The business was about 50 years old. I had about 200 employees, quite a good company. And the son had been running it for the prior 20 years. And he said he wanted to come up with core values. And so what he did is he said, I'm going to go in with no preconceived notion as to how this is going to come out. And I'm going to let the employees, in this case, it was the managers, decide on what our core values should be. So he committed to having all his managers involved in the process. And what they did is they locked themselves up in the boardroom for a day and then began to brainstorm about what each of the managers would believe were their company core values, what they should be. And they ended up with a lot of them. They probably had 25 or 30 before the days was over. And they went through the process of prioritizing that list, and seeking to try and get it down to a manageable number. Now, the president of the company was looking for 3 to 5. And you're going to find that most good companies have very few core values. And part of that's because the mind can't handle a lot of different ideas at once. And so if we focus on the ones that are most important, and that's that word I keep using, focus. If you focus on that, important very few, you have much more a chance of implementing it on a consistent basis. So his group came up with 8 that they wanted. Well, he didn't want to upset the apple cart and tell them this is what they should have, but he said, go home this week and let's go back into meeting next week and see if we can tighten this all up into a list that we can use throughout the company. And his objective, as I said, was to get down to 3 to 5. And I think that was what they did do. And then they took those 3 to 5 beliefs and they wordsmithed them into something that was simple. That's another word that, I use a lot, and memorable. And then they use that when they had gotten there, they used that for their core values. Now, when he had put this list together, the next thing he did was to get all of those managers back together and say, I want you to rate yourself on where you stand with these. Are you on board? Can you accept these as the core beliefs that you want to live by in this company? And of course, not everybody's going to fit into one mold. So he asks the next question. If you don't believe in these beliefs, if you're not committed to them, can you adjust yourself? Can you adapt yourself to make them your beliefs? And then he gave the warning. Measurable adherence to these beliefs is going to be part of your performance plan. So if you want to get along, go along. You've got to work to make sure that what you present in your daily activity, we can observe of you, will reflect the values that we've established for the company. And then he made it understood that if you're unable or unwilling to adapt these values, you're going to end up leaving the company. I might not make if I were the boss, might not make that decision, but you will make that decision yourself because you're going to see that you don't fit. Now, frankly, when I looked at the Lumascape thing last week, there was a guy who was the financial VP, and I think his name was Andrew. And I could see that Andrew might get pushed over the side because his focus was all on money. Of course, that's what he's hired to watch. But there was no real idea of customer service or of looking at the company's long-term strategic positioning. So I could see where he would have flunked the test at some point along the way. But the idea is to get everybody rowing in the same direction. And it's a beautiful thing when they do. If you want to get some really neat films, or if you want to get a really neat story, there's a book called The Boys in the Boat. And it's about the 1936 8-man skulls that went to the Olympics in Nazi Germany and won the gold medal. And the book develops a story about these young men, most of whom came from, this is a rich man's sport, incidentally, but all of them had come from very poor families and had to work really hard just to be able to put in the time for rowing. They had to keep a job while they were doing that. Yet they prevailed over much more elite teams from places like Stanford, Berkeley, Columbia, and Harvard. So it's a great story. The movie came out about it. Really recommend it to you. If everyone isn't rowing in the same direction, what you end up with is something like this. Now, the real value of these is it comes from implementing your core values in the company. So what I would do is prepare a poster and post it every place that people might bump into it. Put one in the employees' locker room where they might be changing their clothes from work clothes into street clothes. Put one in the lobby of the company so that everyone on the outside, from outside the company, knows how you operate. Put one on behind the president's desk, so he has to look at it, and he can make sure that everyone who sits at the desk with him looks at it as well. Also have one out on the shop floor and in the conference room and any place else where people will be reminded what those values are. Make sure every team member gets a copy of it. And you may notice that I don't use the word employee, I don't think, in this particular set of slides, because we want to think in terms of equalizing the people who work at the company. So team member or coworker, you'll find me using that often. So we want to make sure that every team member has a copy of this, maybe put it in their pay envelope so that they have to look at it to get to their check. Then put with that not only the statement, but just as Hewlett Packard does when you look on the internet, or as IBM did in their values jam, look at the explanation of why that value is important for the individual, for the company, and for the customers. Then have a policy that every time you have a manager's meeting, you open it up with one of those core values and have somebody explain it and explain how they are using it in their day-to-day activity. And then you go into the rest of the planned meeting. And this is kind of like running an AA meeting, where at the beginning of the meeting, one of the participants picks one of the 12 steps in the AA book and makes a presentation about that step and how it affects their life, and then goes on to give their testimony. Then you have to live it out. And so you'd be watching to make sure that people are living the life that they said they were going to. Now, and then you get buy-in. You have to seek buy-in from every employee. Oops, I made a mistake there. Every team member, so that everyone is working on the same page. You use this for selecting new hires. You use this as a framework for disciplining workers and directing coworkers, because it allows you to sit down and explain what we're doing well or what we're doing poorly, and keep the focus on the thing that you want to talk about and not on the person. And it also helps you for giving you an objective way to ease somebody out if they don't buy into the values and it's time to leave and go to some other company. The first time I had to fire somebody, and this gave me a real respect for core values. I had a man who was not doing a good job, and it became apparent that he needed to be relieved of the work. And so I called him in one day. I said, "Come on in, I want to talk to you." And he came into the office and closed the door. And he said, "I've been wanting to talk to you too. You know, you are the nicest boss I ever worked for." Well, that was a kind of a letdown to have to then tell the guy the next statement out of my mouth. Don't say current tense that I'm the nicest one you ever worked for. You can say past tense. I'm the nicest one you used to work for. But he continued on before I had to say anything. And he said, "You know, I've been thinking about it, and it's time for me to leave. And so I'm going someplace else. But I just did want to thank you for the time that I worked here." Well, I about did a standing broad jump across that desk to get to him and shake his hands and wish him well. But it made me file something away in my brain. Don't ever put yourself in that situation again. Have a framework for doing the discipline that's necessary, and the best one is going to be using your core values. Now, we also want to make sure that customers know them. I said you put one of these posters up in the lobby so that everyone can see what you do. And what you also need to do is ask the customers and survey them and ask them, are we making clear to you who we are and what we are? Because there may be some people that don't really get excited about what you're doing. And you want to make sure that you are conveying to the public, because they're the people that put bread on your table. You want to be sure that they understand who you are. I want to give you an example of this, and this is one of my, one thing just before I do show you that example. Understand that your core values are an inside-out view of the company. This is where you are telling the customers, this is who we are. This is how you can expect us to act in the community and in our relationships with you as a supplier. And what we're going to find is next week when we go into the mission statement, the mission statement is just the other side of it. This is where the customers tell you, this is what we think you're doing. And that is an important distinction. Well, the last thing I want to show you, and we'll get out of here just about on the half hour, is a thing from the movie 42. Now, Jose, I know you've probably seen this movie because you're the sports nut, but this is one of the great movies I've ever seen, and it's about Jackie Robinson. And he was the man who integrated baseball. Up until that time, there were no black players in the major leagues. There were some wonderful athletes who were playing in the Negro leagues, but they didn't get the chance to play in the big leagues. And one of the managers wanted to break that color barrier, and so he selected Jackie Robinson. And Jackie Robinson was a man with a fiery temper, but also a great evidence of personal control. And he was selected because he knew the manager, the man named Branch Rickey, knew that he would be abused as he was brought up to play in the big leagues, but he wanted somebody who could take it and not fight back. Jackie Robinson was from out here in LA. He went to school at Pasadena Community College for 2 years, then went to play at UCLA, and he was a four-letter man there. He played football, basketball, track, and his weakest sport of the four was baseball. But he was selected to break the barrier. And what I've got here is a little film clip. This is in my hometown, Cincinnati, and that's what that stadium looked like, exactly what it looked like in the late 1940s. And I used to go there in 53, 54, 55, and go down there frequently. My dad would take me down. And man, it just looks exactly like they portrayed it. Well, this is in August of 1947. The man on the left is Pee Wee Reese. He's a shortstop for the Dodgers. And Jackie Robinson is on the right. You're right. And up until this point, Robinson had been abused by all the fans who said horrible things to him and really treated him badly, and by the opposition team who not only had a lot of abuse to throw at him, but also made sure they went into first base with their spikes up or run over his foot with their spikes to hurt him, or when he was at bat, the pitchers would throw at his head. But this was the point where, up until this point, even his teammates were not respectful of his capabilities or of his right to be there. And this is the day where Jackie Robinson, or where Pee Wee Reese explains to him about the core values that he has.
They can say all they want. We're just here to play ball.
It's just a bunch of crackpots still fighting the Civil War.
Well, hell, we'd have won that son of a gun if the corn stalks would have held out. We just ran out of ammunition.
Better luck next time, Pee Wee.
Ain't gonna be it next time, Jax. All we got's right here. Thank you, Jax.
What are you thanking me for?
I got family up there from Louisville. I need them to know. I need them to know who I am.
Hey, number one! You playing ball or socializing?
Playing ball, up.
Come on, nobody's getting to you!
Playing ball. Maybe tomorrow we'll all wear 42. That way they won't tell us apart.
Well, today, each year in April, every player on every team wears a uniform that says 42 in honor of what Robinson had done and in honor of the wonderful talent that he demonstrated in a very graceful manner in a very difficult time. So that's how we live out our core values. Now, Peter Drucker says about core values and strategic planning. He says core values always trump strategy. And if there's a conflict between your strategy, as there may have been in many of the strategies that people had to re-implement during the COVID moment, if there's a conflict between strategy and your core values, push the strategy aside and recenter on the core values. And that's how you're going to make your company live a long time and effectively. So that's my thoughts on core values. If you haven't gotten your list out there to me so far, please do so. And really think about this as to where you come from and what is important to you in your life. Okay? And I'll see you Tuesday.
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And have a good weekend.
I'm going to try.
Have a good weekend, Professor.
Thank you now.